Hi, and welcome to part 2 of our 3-part series on A Bridge to Justice, combating racism within the judicial system. This conversation is just a start, a spark for all of us to listen and then go out and do more to help heal and prevent and combat racism. You'll notice and hear in this segment that there's discussion about witnesses. The fact that witnesses can be so terrified to come forward because they are worried about what will happen to their own lives after they've been harmed and mistreated and brutalized for so long. When we think about justice, when we think about the judicial system, we have to remember every component, every layer, every party, every person, and treating them equally and providing them with equal access. Let's listen. Let's love more. Fani, talk to us more about this concept of perhaps that we, especially in the judicial system, are quick to hire and slow to fire. What do we do?
I think he's absolutely right but what I would say is that will reveal itself. Sometimes somebody can get through the job interview because they have checked all the boxes. They have the education. They don't have any hiccups on their past jobs, or at least you don't know about those hiccups. And so those people will make it into your organization. While I was a deputy DA, I supervised the largest division, 25 employees. And in some sense, I became mama to them because all of their personal and their professional issues came to me. But what I would tell people is I understood that people made mistakes. You didn't find the right case. You missed a fact when you were going through your fact pattern. Those things can be forgiven and those things can be trained. What I cannot accept and what I would not accept and what I will not accept as the district attorney is that people that did not treat other people as if they had dignity. I would say that what we saw in Minneapolis is you didn't even recognize humanity. I would not have treated a dog the way that they treated Mr. Floyd. But for me, you need much less than that, much less than what we witnessed to know that you can't survive in this culture. This officer had, I think they said 18 complaints. That is a failure in leadership. I am not going to have families call me 18 different times on an assistant district attorney before I tell them this is not the right gig for you. You need to go somewhere else and do something else. But I cannot accept someone that does not treat the people that they serve like they are less than them. I used to tell my lawyers all the time, I don't care that you have 2, 3, or 4 degrees behind your name. You're not worth any more to me than that young lady that came in the office that didn't finish the 9th grade. Y'all have equal value, so get that straight. And once they got that was the threshold that will get you in trouble, people start to at least mimic that behavior on the job. But that leadership and that integrity, just as the doctor said, that standard has to be set from the top. And they have to understand that there are some things that there are no second chances for.
Judge Hill, how do we do that in the courtroom then? How do we make this difference in engendering trust, in not only hiring the right people to work within your wheelhouse, your house that is your courtroom, but also building up trust within that courtroom and all that come before you?
So let me start with the staff that is hired. I know and understand and recognize any staff that's hired will reflect who I am. Until the moment I realize that person cannot treat everyone who walks through the door with dignity and respect, they can no longer work for me. There really is no second chance there. Now, in the courtroom, every single person who walks into my courtroom, including the individuals who come through the back door in a jumpsuit with handcuffs, is referred to as Mr. or Miss. I mean, everyone is a human being. I think it was Dr. Alexander who talked about humanity. Humanity and compassion cannot be taught. If we don't have those qualities innately, then it's something that, quite frankly, once you walk into my courtroom and I don't give it to you, then I think I'm exposed. So as a judge, I know and understand that everyone who walks into my courtroom is treated with dignity, is treated with respect. Everyone will have an opportunity to have a level and even playing field. the facts will be heard with an open mind, without judgment, until every single case has been heard, every party has been heard, the law has been considered and applied fairly and appropriately before I make a decision. When you walk in the door, I really don't care what you look like. I don't care what party letter you have behind your name. I don't care what side of town you live on. I simply care about the facts of your case and the specific circumstances surrounding that case and the applicable law. And everyone will know, in fact, anyone who has come before Judge Hill to date will know you're going to get a fair hearing. She may not agree with you, but you will leave saying, I had my day in court and it was a fair day.
Judge
And
Hill,
that's what I will do.
I'm so sorry. Talk to me as a prosecutor. Yeah, I'm a prosecutor in your courtroom. Let's say that. And let's say I'm walking in, I'm not even realizing my bias, but I got a call from somebody. I need to take care of this case. It's somebody that I knew. How do we train prosecutors to help everybody and to make brave decisions, even that might compromise their relationship with friends, their relationships in community, because it's the right thing to do? That we stop being leaders who are aligned to maybe one person, or dare I say one party. And I'm not picking on one side or the other. We can all be vulnerable to this. Do you have any thoughts on how we make prosecutors especially better to help with the equality?
Well, I can tell you, and it doesn't always make me popular. However, if a prosecutor says or does something in my courtroom, I'm not afraid to call it out. And when someone walks in my courtroom and a defense attorney is asking for a bond and the prosecutor objects to that bond, and I look at the file and I see that that individual has been in custody for 150 days or however long they've been in custody, I will say to the prosecutor, Madam or Mr. Prosecutor, if this case was that important to you, you would have done something with it. We're now here. This individual's been sitting for 150 days. By law, he's entitled to a bond, and I'm going to grant him a bond. So it's really about holding people's feet to the fire and not accepting those excuses and not allowing people to work under the cloak of doing what's right when in fact it's very clear that they have some ulterior motive. So I'm not afraid to call it out. I just say what it is, and it's on the record. And at the end of the day, I'm the judge, and I get to make that final call.
And there is that profound conversation again about the cloak, the light and darkness that's so desperately needed. Dr. Alexander, I'd like you and Fani Willis to both jump in on this. If we can start with you, let's talk about the officers in the George Floyd case who stood there. Let's talk about bystanders who do nothing, not just as officers, but any one of us who aren't doing more. What do we do about that? Do we think about Good Samaritan laws and initiating that? What do we do about the pain and the culpability of the people who stand and do nothing when there is a cry for somebody, for their mother, as they are taking their last breath and being murdered? What do we do?
Well, first of all, let me say this. The witnesses who walk up and down that street every day, probably in Minneapolis, lived in that neighborhood in all likelihood. And the officers who worked in that neighborhood, it was probably part of their zone, their sector, whatever the case may be. And it gave a clear appearance to me that officers are ex-cops like Siobhan and his partners. They probably didn't even know people in that community. I guarantee they didn't know him, because if they knew him, had any kind of relationship with him, under the situation they were in, they would have let that man breathe. But they had no respect even for citizens who begged and cried. He can't breathe. His nose is bleeding. He's still. Let the man up. He's unconscious. They could not physically throw themselves in that. Because if you're black and you got 4 white men with guns and uniforms, and you go over and try to knock one of them off of the victim here, their fear was that they would have gotten shot and killed themselves. And even if they had not, they would have got arrested for interfering in police matters and charged and came before one of these judges. They were in a no-win situation. That's exactly what they're in. So as much as I know they probably wanted to jump over there and knock these guys off of him, but they weren't going to take the risk of getting themselves shot and killed or being arrested and then have to go before the judge. And then probably a bogus, overwritten, falsely written police report of interfering in police affairs or whatever the state law may be there. I'm quite sure these judges and attorneys have seen before. So it was a no-win situation for them. And it really was not their responsibility. The responsibility of the welfare and the care of that prisoner that they had taken into custody was that of those 4 officers. That's what they were trained and sworn to do.
And those are the bystanders I'm talking about. Those other officers who stood and did nothing.
They were just complicit. They were complicit. They were irresponsible, and they were soulless just as much as Siobhan. As far as I'm concerned, all 4 of them, even the one officer that was standing there, pushing the crowd back, if you will, of motioning them back, their foot might as well have been on his neck as well.
And in fact, I would argue that it was. I would argue that they were all on his neck. Fani, jump in here. Talk about the soulless robbing souls. Talk about the fact that we're not just dealing with the one who's videotaped and it looks like the sole one inflicting the pain. Talk about the pain and violence that's being perpetrated beyond that, and how we as citizens, how we as members of the judiciary and in the legal system, how do we do better?
Well, first of all, just from watching the video, which is it's very hard to watch, but just watching the video, my recollection is that there are 2 other officers that are also down on him. And so the fact that that prosecutor said that he couldn't make out whatever their version of party to a crime is, as far as I'm concerned, the facts that I looked at is they are active participants. I would argue even that 4th gentleman who backed people up to allow this to happen became an active participant. So I think that they are more than just the observers of the citizens who did not want to get involved. I think that they are active participants, and indictments should come down on all 4 of them. That is thing number 1. But for us as a society, the real question is, this has to stop. It has to stop. I had someone approach me as I'm running for DA, and what they wanted to talk about was, well, what about all the officers that are killed? And I had to say, let's stop. I don't agree with violence against anyone, officer or non-officer. But what we're not going to do in this discussion is we are not going to belittle or deter the facts. People got very mad at the Black Lives Movement matter, saying that, oh, why are you just saying Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, White Lives Matter? That goes without saying. What people are trying to say to you is that they feel like all of those other lives have been respected, that the society has recognized that they matter. But now we want also for Black men's lives to matter. And so that's what we have to focus on, and that's what we have to talk about. And that goes back to my initial statement about recognizing before you can cure that alcoholism, you have to recognize there's a problem. And so I think that what we as judges and as officers and as attorneys and as lay people, we have to say, we have a problem. It's time to fix it. And we have to do that by, as the doctor said, screening people. But I submit to you, this is not a perfect world, and people are going to get past that screening. But when they show you who they are, we have to believe them and get rid of them. And you have to try to train those officers that are good people, but maybe they grew up in a white neighborhood, they've never been exposed to Black people, and they just don't know. That doesn't mean you're inhumane. It means you don't have that life experience. And those people you can train to do the right thing every time. But those people, those officers that participated in this, I mean, something is wrong with them. Not that it should excuse their behavior, but some moral deep down compass is missing.
I would contend, though, that training can happen if first people recognize there's a sickness, there's a cancer, and if they are willing to admit they want to get well.
Right.
I want our listeners to really, really hear what you said and Dr. Alexander said, and correct me if I've in any way misstated this. It is vitally important that from this day forward, people are not offended and bothered by this concept of Black Lives Matter. And it's not just Black men, it's Black women. It's people who have been far too marginalized, far too abused, far too brutalized. And it's not saying other people don't matter, but it is valuing that life, a life that we have not given sufficient humanity for and have not said equal.